There is nothing more terrifying than being fearful of your own death, and Valerie Reyes was a young woman who expressed these very concerns to her own mother. It appears that these feelings were actually a morbid premonition which would occur only several hours later. How did Valerie know that she was going to die? Or were these terrible thoughts simply out of dark coincidence? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the tragic case of Valerie Reyes. And just to let you know, but I post solved, unsolved and strange cases here on a weekly basis. So if you're interested, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. Before we continue, I wanted to thank Scentbird for sponsoring today's video. In the very same way that Netflix lets you watch hundreds of video titles, Scentbird lets you try out hundreds of different perfumes and colognes for only $17 a month. They work directly with big-name brands such as Prada, Gucci and Versace, and with niche brands like Skylar and Heretic, to provide you with a 30-day supply of whatever fragrance you pick, which is great for someone like me who gets bored of the same cologne very quickly. Never get bored of your scent and be a smart and conscious consumer. Scentbird lets you try out fragrances without having to commit to a full-size bottle, and you can even upgrade to try 2 or 3 a month if you like. Scentbird has changed the way in which we discover, shop for, and even experience fragrances. Select a fragrance of your choice every month. Not sure which ones you want? Take their simple quiz online, and Scentbird will help you find the fragrance you'll love. Bottles of cologne and perfume can cost anywhere from $150 to $500, and sometimes even more. But with Scentbird, you can get a bottle of luxury fragrance for just $7, using my code CCRIME55. All of Scentbird fragrances come in a variety of stylish and colourful cases. Confidence on the go. They are small enough to take with you in a bag or even in your pocket. So, if you're interested, use my coupon code CCRIME55 to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. That's just $7 for your first month. Scentbird is currently available in the US and Canada. Now with that said, let's begin today's video. Grab a coffee, pull up a seat and sit back. This is the case of Valerie Reyes. New York. You seem to be appearing in a lot of my videos in the recent weeks. Welcome to New Rochelle, folks. Found in the southern corner of the state of New York, New Rochelle is a city of roughly 80,000 residents. The city was initially established by French refugees in 1688, predominantly from La Rochelle in France. A lot has changed since then, as nowadays New Rochelle is an important centre for business outside of the Big Apple. Pressing ahead with our story, we find ourselves visiting the home of Valerie Reyes. Born on April 9th, 1994, her mother Norma and father Sal brought her into what would be a close and tight-knit family. Valerie was the oldest of 4 children, and from childhood right through to adulthood, she held a close relationship with her siblings. By the year of 2019, Valerie was 24 years old, and standing at 5 feet and 3 inches, she had black hair, brown eyes, and a half-sleeve tattoo on her left arm. She worked as a store clerk at the Barnes & Noble store nearby, at the Vernon Hills shopping centre. And working here for nearly 3 years, many people in the area knew her. Working at a bookstore, Valerie was actually an artist at heart. She aspired to become a tattooist, and was very excited about her goals and future. Described as a gentle person who would always stop and talk to the neighbourhood children, Valerie was nurturing and generally open-minded. There was, however, a fragile side to Valerie too, and like I think most of us do, she sometimes struggled from anxiety and, at times, depression. It was nothing too serious, but persistent enough to sometimes bring disruption to her life. On January the 28th, Valerie's mother, Norma, answered her phone to a rather panicked daughter. Norma always knew that she suffered from anxiety, but Valerie was particularly paranoid this evening. She was apparently finding it very difficult to talk, and seemed to be very frightened over something. Asking her daughter what exactly the problem was, Valerie didn't mention anything or anyone specifically. Instead, she simply said, "I'm scared, I'm paranoid, I'm getting anxiety attacks." Norma desperately tried to pry for more information from her daughter, and Valerie eventually replied back to say, "I'm scared someone is going to murder me." Now, there wasn't much reason for Valerie to feel this way. She was a well-behaved woman, had no enemies, and lived a cautious life. She may have broken up with her boyfriend 5 days earlier, but he wasn't the aggressive type. Prying further, Norma asked her why she felt that way. Was there someone at her house? And was it her ex-boyfriend? Valerie replied with no, no, and no. She simply didn't feel safe being alone in her own home. The two talked things through for a while, putting it down to simple newfound anxiety. There was nothing too much to worry about, and shortly after this, Valerie and Norma said their goodnights. Sleep well, speak again soon. Only soon would never come, as that very same night, Valerie disappeared. Texting back and forth with a friend late that evening, Valerie signed off from her phone at around 11:35 PM. She said, "I'm a knockout now, my eyes can't stay open anymore, lol." She had work early in the morning and needed to get some sleep. But this was the last time she would ever reply to anyone, as the very next morning, she missed her shift at Barnes & Noble. Her family were notified shortly after this, and her friends eventually heard of the news too. And despite loved ones trying to contact her, she failed to respond to text messages. All of her phone calls went straight through to voicemail. Valerie's disappearance became a lot more serious after this, and on January the 30th at 2:43 PM, Valerie Reyes was officially reported as missing. Posters were distributed around the local area, and as rumour made its way around the local community of New Rochelle, both concern and support were found. There had been a series of murders against young women in the local area through recent years, and although not likely connected, it was very worrisome that Valerie was now nowhere to be found. The Reyes family were quick to find an FBI agent who had been assigned to work in parallel with police investigations. Court documentation shows that Special Agent Daniel McKenna had over 20 years of experience on the job. And as investigations began, law enforcement were quick to identify fresh bank activity from Valerie's bank account. She had apparently used an ATM in the Manhattan area at around 5 AM on the 29th of January. This would have been only a few hours after her last confirmed contact with family and friends. Police were quick to request to review the footage from the ATM machine, but this would take a few days to come back. There were several items missing from her apartment too. It appeared as if she had taken her iPhone, iPad, fresh sets of clothes and bedsheets. So the question was, had she left on her own accord, or had she been taken? Over the following days, scores of friends and family took to social media, asking for help in finding their beloved Valerie. They shared pictures of her and described what she last wore. But it seemed as if no one could agree where exactly she disappeared. Some of the makeshift posters that were shared across social media said she was last seen walking to the train station, while others claimed that she vanished in Lower Manhattan. But regardless, authorities couldn't find any sign of Valerie anywhere. Or at least for the first several days. In the early morning hours of February the 5th, 2019, highway workers were working along the side of the road of Stillman Lane, found near the town of Greenwich. The location roughly 10 miles away from Valerie's home. That is when they came across a red suitcase. The suitcase appeared to be full, with a heavy and solid object inside. Approaching the suitcase, curiosity got the better of them. The highway workers slowly unzipped the bag, and what they found inside was an awfully harrowing sight. Inside was the body of a young female adult. She was fully clothed, but her shirt had been unbuttoned. She had visible injuries to her head. Her hands and feet were bound, her mouth covered with several layers of tape. To the men, it was not clear how exactly she died, but she clearly suffered a terrible death. The woman in the suitcase was Valerie, and the very next day, her own father and brother would confirm her identity. After a week of panic, questions and concerns, lay a grisly and devastating end. As Valerie's family and friends faced the new challenge of comprehending their loss, investigating officers refocused their efforts to find her killer. And as it turns out, progress was already being made.
Police now identify the victim as 24-year-old Valerie Reyes of New Rochelle, New York. Her body was found earlier this week on the side of the road, the Quiet Road in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was discovered inside a red suitcase. Her hands and feet were bound. Reyes had been reported missing to New York State authorities and was last seen on January 29th at about 9 a.m. Now, in a statement, police say her family was advised of the positive identification last night, and authorities are now sending heartfelt condolences to them. Now, investigators also say that a cause of death has not yet been confirmed, but many pieces of possible physical evidence were collected.
Circling back to Valerie's bank activity on the morning she had disappeared, this activity was actually a cash withdrawal from an ATM machine located in New Rochelle, which means they could now look back at the ATM's camera. And although we don't have access to this footage, detectives described a male figure in dark pants and black sneakers exiting a Honda CR-V. He then withdrew $1,000 from Valerie's bank account. The car's license plate was actually visible in adjacent surveillance footage, and after doing some research, they found that this car was a rental vehicle from a company in Flushing, New York. Just one phone call later, and it appeared that this car had been rented to a man named Javier Da Silva, and it just so happened that this man used to be dating Valerie Reyes. So, who exactly is Javier? Well, first of all, his full name is Javier Enrique Da Silva Rojas. Born on January 3rd, 1995, he was a few months younger than Valerie, and also 24 years at the time of her disappearance. Javier was a college student living and studying in the country of Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is currently in the middle of an economic and political crisis, and it has been for several years now. Venezuela's current situation is both tragic and extremely interesting. It is not something I can briefly cover, but the long story short is that the country is in total anarchy. And in the year 2017, Javier fled from Venezuela to make a better life for himself in the US. Unfortunately, this was not through honest means. He entered the US on the Visa Waiver Program, which allows visitors for tourism or business purposes to stay for 90 days or less without a visa. Javier overstayed his welcome and was living unlawfully in New York City, but otherwise he didn't seem so bad. He worked as a short order cook and cashier at a restaurant, living in Flushing of Queens, New York. He was a gamer, liked horror movies, and generally kept his head down. Moving forward into January of 2018, Javier met Valerie on a dating website. Friendship kindled into a love interest, and before they knew it, the two were dating. It's clear to see through previous social media posts that Javier was madly in love with Valerie. In his own words, which are kind of strange, his favourite thing about her was how she smelled. Valerie was a lot of fun to be around, and he appreciated her company greatly. This relationship lasted for a few months, but unfortunately, in April of 2018, Valerie felt forced to end the relationship when Javier grew too expectant of her. Apparently, he wanted to move in with her, something she was not yet ready for. He was also allegedly very pushy and wouldn't take no for an answer. The personal connection to Valerie, along with this surveillance footage, was enough for officers to question his involvement. So on February 11th, 2019, Javier was arrested at his apartment.
Since Valerie Reyes was found deceased in Greenwich on February 5th, Greenwich police have been working closely with police from New Rochelle, New York. Several crime scenes have been examined, hours of surveillance video have been reviewed, and numerous interviews conducted. Detectives from both agencies have pursued a multitude of leads. There has been intense focus on the use of Valerie's ATM card, after which we believe she was murdered. This line of investigation, corroborated by others, led us to a suspect. Last night in Queens, New York, detectives from New Rochelle, accompanied by detectives from the Greenwich Police Department, located and arrested a suspect in the fraudulent use of Valerie's ATM card. The suspect is Javier Da Silva of Queens, New York, but I want to emphasize investigation continues. The investigation is not finished yet. There's a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up.
Javier started talking to police very quickly after his arrest, and the news, it wasn't good. And although he admitted to burying her body, he insisted that it was an accident. He told officers that apparently she had died during one final session of sex, falling off the bed and cracking her head open. Apparently, he didn't know what to do. Now, I'm not sure if binding his lover's hands and feet together, packing her into a suitcase, and then rinsing her bank account was the gentlest of approaches to a head injury, but officers didn't like his story either. According to a jailhouse interview with Javier, he said, "She fell. We fell together. She wasn't responding. I put my mouth on hers. I tried to put air in. I'm a bad person and I did something wrong. I didn't call the police because I thought they would blame me." He allegedly bound her body because she didn't fit in the suitcase. And when asked if he knew cops would find him, he nodded. He even claimed he withdrew cash from Valerie's account because he wanted to get caught. But officers soon found a new potential motive behind his actions. It turns out that, on January the 24th, only 4 days prior to Valerie's disappearance, Javier had texted his new partner to say, "I just found my ex fucking in my bed with the guy next door, but I didn't want to tell you shit." So, we have now established that all of this was Javier's wrongdoing. But what exactly happened to Valerie Reyes? On the afternoon of January the 28th, 2019, Valerie had left her job at Barnes & Noble's in Vernon shopping centre. Later that evening, she told her mother Norma that she was nervous and anxious, afraid that someone was going to murder her. We don't know if this was an unlucky premonition or if she knew that Javier was scheming. But unbeknownst to Valerie, during this phone call to her mother, Javier was already up to no good. At 10:50 p.m, a surveillance camera captured Javier leaving his apartment in Queens, New York. And 5 minutes later, another camera spotted Javier retrieving a rental car from a garage near his home. Google location data shows that Javier then drove to New Rochelle after plugging in the coordinates of a church near her home, and just moments after midnight, he reached Valerie's house. He then switched his phone to airplane mode and made his way to the front door. Shortly after gaining entry to the property, Valerie and Javier began to argue. A violent altercation ensued, and as things became physical, Valerie suffered a traumatic injury to the head, bruising around the face, and a large hematoma to her forehead. Javier then covered her mouth with several layers of packing tape, bound her feet and hands with twine, and, while she was still alive, he then locked her in a suitcase. Javier then placing this suitcase containing her in his rental vehicle. At approximately 3 a.m, Javier gained access to her phone by taking her thumbprint. He then took the opportunity to view her photos, notes, and browsing history. Very shortly after this, but Valerie's phone stopped pinging cell towers, and this was likely by being put into airplane mode. He then used her thumbprint again to gain access to her bank account on her phone, and around half an hour after this, he went to an ATM machine and extracted $1,000 from her account. It was in this very moment that Javier made his greatest mistake, one that would eventually get him caught, as this ATM had a camera. After obtaining the money, he then drove eastbound toward Greenwich, removed the suitcase containing Valerie, and dumped it in a woodland several meters from the road. Undisclosed surveillance footage then showed he arrived back at home at 9:43 a.m. that morning, and he was now wearing a different outfit compared to the night before. On January the 30th, Valerie was reported missing to the New Rochelle Police Department by her mother, father, and recent boyfriend. And, all in the meanwhile, Javier pulled out another $1,000 out of Valerie's bank account. He then washed the rental car and returned it. In the days after this, and while her family and friends were left in panic and despair, Javier rinsed a total of $5,350 out of her bank account. He sold her iPad and bought himself an Apple monitor and a laptop instead. And after this, he would later take a photo of himself showing off his new tech gear. Valerie's body remained lost to the world for a total of 8 long days. We don't know how long she had survived, but she was trapped in a suitcase that eventually became her own coffin. On February the 5th, 2019, Valerie was finally discovered by highway workers. But tragically, one of these workers would take pictures of her body and then send them to friends before calling the police. Quick side note, but this idiot lost his job. When Javier was arrested 6 days after this, Valerie's bank card and driver's license were found in his wallet. His DNA would also be found on the red suitcase and on a genital swab conducted on Valerie's body. On February the 12th, 2019, Javier da Silva was charged with kidnapping resulting in death. The Connecticut Medical Examiner's Office concluded that his ex-girlfriend had died from homicidal asphyxiation. Almost 1 year later, on February the 5th, 2020, Javier pled guilty to the kidnapping of Valerie Reyes. This was in return for a named sentence of 30 years, and in September of 2021, he received just that. As most of these stories go, multiple victim impact statements were released. Within these statements, Valerie's mother said, "A mother never wants to face a terrible day like this. It would take me a day to describe the joy that Valerie brought into our lives. My boys are all heartbroken and devastated. You, Javier da Silva, are a selfish, greedy, soulless person. Today I hope that Valerie finds the justice she deserves." Judge Bracetti followed up in court by saying, "What you did to this woman was sickening. Anyone who could do such a thing is not a good person by definition. And anyone who can do a thing like that is an evil person. Justice requires an evil deed be punished by a lengthy prison sentence. It is obvious to see that Javier kidnapped and murdered an innocent young woman with her entire life ahead of her, and he did this in an incredibly cruel fashion. The final moments of her life, and the final memory many will have of her, will be of Valerie gravely injured and trapped in her own suitcase. A vision among the most horrific of thoughts. The motives behind Javier's actions were ridiculous, but obvious. He murdered his former lover out of jealousy and greed. The almost entirely absent emotions of care and compassion, replaced by venomous levels of self-regard. With Javier's visa long expired before his crimes, he now faces immediate deportation after his prison term. But before that, he will have to make it to the year 2049. Whether he will move back to Venezuela or Portugal, it is not yet clear. Valerie's murder was so senseless that even her killer has left this story feeling entirely remorseful. She has lost her life in the most horrific of ways and deserved so much more time than she was given. Her mother Norma still describes her as humble, artistic, and a true warrior. She was free-spirited and always brightened the lives of her family and friends with her beautiful smile. And without her, her brothers remain heartbroken from her absence. Following Valerie's death, her family and friends raised a GoFundMe campaign to help pay for her funeral costs. Valerie received a tremendous amount of support from the local community, and in fact, over $31,000 was raised to help lay her to rest. And, unfortunately, that just about wraps up the case of Valerie Reyes, another young woman senselessly murdered by a heartless fool. There weren't many side notes to this case, but one thing that I did find strange, however, was the glaring mistakes found in official court documentation. For example, an attorney states that Valerie's body remained there for almost 2 weeks. But their own dates of January the 29th and February the 5th would confirm only 8 days. I'm not sure if this is an exaggeration or not, but it's highly unprofessional. Just state the facts. False reports of seeing Valerie in town after the day she disappeared certainly muddied the waters of this case too, again highlighting the importance of witnesses giving accurate statements. And that's pretty much it today. Thank you again so much for watching another video by Coffeehouse Crime folks. What exactly are your thoughts on the case of Valerie Reyes? Do you think that 30 years is enough? Please share your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you again for being here folks, I really do appreciate you being here, and maybe one day I'll get around to making you that cup of coffee. And thank you to Scentbird for partnering up with me on this video. Use my coupon code CCRIME55 to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. That's just $7 for your first month. Please check the links down below. Now, as always, I'll see you again real soon in the next video. But until that moment arrives, please remember to look after each other. Goodbye.